Hi, this is Kerry-Ann Reed Brown, and this is Carry On Friends, the Caribbean American podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Carry On Friends, the Caribbean American podcast. I am so excited about my guest today. Her name is Akilah Richards. Akilah, welcome to the podcast. Wagwan, sister.
Yes, thank you for having me, Kerry-Ann. All right, all is well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right. So, Akilah, why don't you tell the community of friends a little bit about who you are, what you do, Caribbean country you represent, and all that good stuff?
Yes. I am a writer, first and foremost, and a mother, a partner. The reason we're here for this conversation is because I'm an unschooling parent, and we'll talk about what that is and how we got there and all of that. From Jamaica originally, so is my partner. Our daughters were raised partially here in the U.S. and partially back home in JA. We are also a nomadic family. We've been digital nomads since 2012, which basically means we don't have a particular space that we call our base. Like our bodies are our bases. We are home. And we travel. We've been to, I had it written down somewhere. I know it's 42 cities and counting across, I think maybe 7 countries. And really just our lifestyle has really been about looking at the ways that colonization in particular and the effects of it influence how we live, how we make decisions as parents, how we make decisions as business owners, all of that. And then it really led us to the point of realizing that our children couldn't be confined to a system and also be free people simultaneously. And so that's what my work professionally and personally is all about.
Oh, Akilah, I mean, that alone we're going to deconstruct, but this is why I want you to be on the show. All right, so let's first talk about what is unschooling, and may have a little idea what it is, but what is unschooling exactly, and how is that different from homeschooling?
Yeah, and that's an important question, I think, because I think it usually starts out like semantics, but it really isn't. I'll give you my definition of unschooling. I call it a child-trusting, anti-oppression, liberatory, love-centered approach to parenting and caregiving. It is also the process of creating and expanding communities of confident, capable people who understand how they learn best and how to work collaboratively to learn and solve things. So for me, the reason why that's different from homeschooling or even school in the conventional sense is because that one is not anti-oppression. It is not child trusting. It says, here are the things that I believe a young human should learn. Here's the time frame by which they should learn it. Here is the standard by which we will judge whether they're doing well or not. And the focus is on academics and accomplishing the goals that were set by not the young person, not the learner. Unschooling is essentially a form of self-directed education where it's saying that we understand as human beings who've observed in all different capacities how learning works. We ourselves have been children. We are also constant learners, and we know that consent and interest are 2 primary parts of how real learning happens, not something where you can recite and say, look, hey, give me my shiny star because I remembered everything that you told me. Not that. Learning. How learning actually happens, as most of us know, is because we're interested in something or we are thrown into something where it feels really urgent to us. We don't even sleep the way we normally need to. We can't help but talk to other people about it. And because, as we said back home, everything is everything. There's nothing you can be interested in that isn't going to lead you to the path of other things that you didn't even know about, let alone know that you are interested in. That is organic. That is innate. That's how learning happens. And so self-directed education, of which unschooling is one form, says if curiosity and consent and an environment of adults who understand how to facilitate learning, if those things are present, then you don't have to nor should you give a predetermined curricula. That's what it is and how it's different than homeschooling or conventional education.
Well, all right. So my big question, you said a lot and we go through that. My question for you is, and we talked about this a few months ago, like
Yeah.
we come from a culture where I say book, book, book. You have to pressure
Yep.
on the
Pressure on
book.
the notebook. Yep.
You understand me? Say school, 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 degree, degree, degree.
Yep.
And, you know, that transition from a culture of, I mean, like you will go school and they rank you in a class. Like you know,
Yeah.
come first, second, or third in a class. And you
Yes.
know, one come last. And you understand?
Yeah,
So
your
you know
whole
the thing.
identity
You're in a
is
first
wrapped up.
brightest class versus who in
Yes.
a last brightest
From
class.
primary school,
School,
are you prefect? Are you,
you
it's like, yeah.
you know the thing. And,
Yep.
you know, for anyone who went to the school in the Caribbean, it's like making prefect is a status. You
Yes.
know, like, you know, if you're not prefect, you are my class captain or vice
Yes.
captain. And for full disclosure, I was one or both of those at some point, you know.
Same.
You
Yeah.
understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, like this idea of being an achiever in the sense of going to school, how you end up here, so, and how, you know, me know where you're going to tell me about your mom because, you know, but like, you know, like how them deal with that when you
Right.
know, Akilah, you got to pick
Oh,
them out of school.
listen,
Talk to
listen.
me a little bit about that.
Before that even came out of anybody else's mouth, it was in my brain and Chris's brain for the longest. Like you asked the question in the middle of that. You said, how did you get from there to here? And I would say kicking and screaming. It was not like, Chris and I weren't from the beginning like, yeah, so we'll think about it and the system oppressive. Nah, it wasn't that. Our girls, we moved to the neighborhood to move them into the good school, quote unquote, so that they could excel. Both of my children knew how to read and write before they even got to school because, oh, you mean? Like I was definitely the conventional minded book, as you said. And I was great at performing studenthood. I went to college on scholarships and, all the checklist things that any Caribbean person listening to this is like, yep, get it.
Mm-hmm.
When Marley and Sage, our daughters, who are now 16 and 14, but this was back in maybe 2010, when they first started school. Marley, who's the oldest, she was labeled gifted and talented really early on. And so they were pulling from different curricula to try to find something that kind of met what her varied needs were academically. So by the time she got to first grade, she was spending half of the year in a fourth grade class and all kind of test, some of which we didn't even know that they were giving her. So she was missing recess. To which, for me, generally, so what? Because she's doing something academic. But after being with my actual child, not just the thoughts in my mind, and realizing how important that was for her, like, mommy, I didn't get to go, or I keep not getting to go to recess because I'm in this cold room taking a test. And I'm like, just little things like that started showing up to me like, okay, what is the message here? The message is that thing is more important than the thing that's essentially her version of self-care, which is outside of the classroom to be with her friends, to run around and to play. I didn't get why the school wouldn't see that as relevant, not necessarily more important than the test, but just relevant, right?
Mm-hmm.
We started to notice over time that academics were unquestionably the priority, and the whole child, her feelings, for example, the little shishi foo things that we don't really care about in school, those things were being not only ignored, but at times like oppressed, like pushed down. And she kept expressing that to Chris and to me. And we were like, there, hun, that's life, basically.
And
This
that's
is
what you go
good.
to school for.
Exactly. You're smart. Just pay attention to the right thing, blah, blah, blah. Sage started school, our youngest, and the same thing happened academically. And emotionally, it was also a very trying time for her because she is what we call a comfortable introvert. She's not like shy or afraid or whatever. She just in a people, like, I don't know how else to word it. And she's
May I see it,
comfortable
your
like
sister?
that. You see it? Okay, like as a little, I would take this kid to the park and she loved being at the park, but she didn't want to play with the kids. She just wanted to be out in the sun, talk to the plants, drink her juice, do her thing. So school for her, she kept saying, Mommy, they keep peopling on me, because it felt like something that people were doing like to her, on her. So long story short, over time, the ways that we saw Marley and Sage start to shrink, like Marley went from this really like extroverted, I have a question about this, let me ask you, or I want to play date with your child, come and meet my mother, matter of fact, I have her business card, here you go. She went from being that type of kid to I don't know if this is a good question to ask, but like them just shrink down my pitney. Like we were just like, wait a minute, which thing is more important here? The fact that academically them look good, or that like the whole person is being served. And then we started to realize how ridiculous it was that we, Chris and I, expected the school to nurture the whole child when enough of them pitney, like they're ours. So if we sent a message that we, as their parents, were merely extensions of the school system, like enforcing whatever the school said, versus listening to actual them and looking at a way that can work well for both the school and for them, then we were not allies of our children. They shouldn't freaking trust us because we were just extensions of another system.
Right.
So that happened over the course of a couple of years, literally 2 years. And then by the time we got the memo, the frustration of the girls, we said, okay, let's break them out of school prison, because it definitely was feeling like they were limited versions of themselves. I was like, all right, let's try to figure out what we can do. So we enrolled them in a virtual academy, which is just school at home, same K through 12 perspective. And we realized once we withdrew them from school, that we had a little bit more space to do other things. Because of course we were thinking back then about supplementing learning, and I'm using that in air quotes because you really don't need to do that. So anyway, we enrolled them in the virtual academy, and we said, all right, maybe we can travel now, because since we don't have to travel at the same time as like everybody else during high season and blah, blah, let's go to Jamaica for an extended time. Like maybe let's spend a month or whatever. So we did that a couple of times. And then we the first time we were going to do it for 6 weeks, I had my mom ship the books from the virtual academy in Georgia to Jamaica to make sure, the girls were learning while we were exploring and doing all this natural learning on the side. Peer pushback from Marley and Sage. We don't care about the book. We just want to go to the beach and blah, blah, blah. And so we went from pushing and forcing to being like, you know what? Fine, you could take a 2 weeks off. Don't learn nothing. Me neither. Well, let's watch some white rum and some beach and blah, blah, blah. Let's revisit this in a few weeks when we've all regained our composure. And that was 2012. We never revisited it because we started to see how Marley and Sage were and do still continue to learn, and how we can facilitate it, and how schooling would really interrupt that for them at this point.
All right.
And yeah.
All right. I'm going to just pause you right there. So, because I'm going to ask the same questions. We've had this conversation a little bit, and the episode I listened to Fear of the Free Child was the school wounds, and it just resonated with me because resonated not only, and I think my experience of being very self-aware, like I did have school wounds, but that episode made me realize that I was part of someone else's school wounds. You understand? Because if they didn't feel like they were doing enough, because, I think it was Marley and why this person don't know how to read yet or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize that the kid is looking, I'm putting myself in Marley's, some other child is looking at me like, why is she, looking at me as that person who they're going with the most while they're struggling. So I'm part of their school wound story. And, and so the cycle perpetuates. And I think that's what resonated with me in that particular episode. And as I listened to it, right, it was in that moment. And I think I told you, like, before I already knew it. I knew it before I even listened to your episode. But my son, Ethan,
Yes.
I said to you, even before that, and we did a report card, and I said to the teacher, I said, me knows if Ethan can do structured schooling, because Ethan can't stay still. Even with his illness, Ethan, Akilah, they paid me not stay still.
Yeah.
Right. But even then, I just knew that how school structure is. And I remember doing report card and talking to his teacher and the principal. They were like, yeah, we know, but we don't offer that. And so going back, it's like somebody that listened to this and I say, home if I pick up and left my work. Oh, first of all, me can't even manage homeschooling. And we'll talk about the crisis, or everybody know of it, pitting them the home and thing. Me not have time for their work or not work and a teach Pitney, much less a room world, not have no
I'm
stable.
So glad you brought that
all
up.
of this something
into
there.
it. Yes, because it also speaks to your last statement about like how culturally and all of that. So a lot of people, because of the work that I do, like I'm an unschooling organizer. I have a podcast about it, but I actually work with communities to look at ways to address exactly those questions where you bring up a while ago, like how, when, which part, how you start, all of that stuff.
Because and you could talk to me because I, as a parent, and it's innate, like I didn't need to listen to your episode. It's like the we know say a spiritual thing, the divine guidance guide me to the episode to confirm what I already know. That Ethan, and even before that with Ariel, like their learning styles are very different. And Ethan's feedback in class was he not keep still, he not focus. And it's not because I know that Ethan isn't smart. It's because the structure that he has to operate in no work for him. Ethan is Ethan Ravers, we call Ethan. Ethan one dance.
I love it. Yes.
Right.
So that space for him would be oppressive, not in the sense of like slavery or whatever, when we think about these terms like colonization and oppression. But let me talk to you specifically, and I'm glad you gave me permission to speak to you specifically, right? When we think about a thing like how your child is designed, you've known him from in utero, like you've known him literally from day one. You know what he's like, physicality, enough to know that smart cannot be limited to the definition that we have in a context of school, because we know school is like its job is to try to simulate the skills that we will need after school. But show of hands, boys and girls listening, how much I know leave school, and I'm just talking about high school, feeling fully equipped to manage your life on your own.
No way.
Then when you went to undergraduate, boys and girls, did you leave there with such a sense of clarity of where you're going to work, how you're going to generate income, wonderfully debt-free, and a super strong sense of who you are and how you learn? Yes? Show of hands, right? So saying all of that to say the context of school, the first thing is that as a parent, you have to try to stop measuring the success of yourself and your child based on schoolishness, is what I call it. Based on the ideas of school, because school, as you and I know, is not the end all be all. However, when your child is young, for some of us, it's a safe place for them to be, because we know what I'm going from this time to that time. There are adults who we can look in their face and say, look, you're who I'm leaving my kid with, all of these type of things. Accountability, you feel like the person is trained. We know, can you hear the issues with that? Like teachers, of course, they're trained, but they're also notoriously underpaid and overworked, notoriously have to come out of pocket for supplies, even if you're in certain districts. They are, teachers are completely confined to the system. They just have a choice, unlike children, right? So we know these things. So you say, okay, I know that my kid isn't built for this system. Most children are not. But I also know that I work full time. And so I can't like just be at home and observe them and see what they're into and blah, blah, blah. A few things. One, self-directed education is a whole ass movement. Can I cuss on here? Sorry. It's a whole movement.
Yeah, man, you're good with us.
Okay, cool. It's a whole movement. So you do not, unlike homeschooling, you do not have to figure out a curriculum and how to do it at home. You're in New York, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so there are agile learning centers, and I'll, send you some links for this episode. There are a few agile learning centers in New York, and they are throughout New York, and they are essentially what I call unschooling schools. They use the principles of self-directed education, which are dealing with like curiosity and community work, all these life skills that include academics, but not with coercion, and also include all of these other social skills, the things we'll buck up like, oh, I'm at my job and this person is encroaching on my personal boundary, but I don't have any practice with saying how to do that. I'm just either going to blow up or I'm just going to take it, because nothing in school taught me anything about that. Matter of fact, listen, right? Matter of fact, school probably penalized me for holding my boundary. So these are the skills that in a place like an agile learning center, these skills are practiced in addition to, oh, my son loves to dance. So we're going to look at bringing people in who do professional dance, people who can show him the connection between dance and physics, dance and biology, dance and nutrition, dance and breath work, dance and all these other things that we don't even think about are related to dance, because we're like, please, you need to study a book. But there's so much to study in dance. So self-directed education says, look at the whole person, all of the interests, and find the support you need. Culturally, how I end up getting to families, or how I end up having a different type of conversation with families than the one that we expect to have, is because of the words that you used, school wounds. Most people come to me after a point where their child has been so damaged by trying to contort themselves to fit into schoolishness that they're just like, listen, I don't even get it. I don't know what I'm going to learn, but what I know is that this is not working, right? So they're just like you. It's not something that you came to my podcast and you're like, oh my God, she showed me the light and the way. No, you didn't know already. So now you're like, what does that look like? So it looks like typing in, for example, going to the Alliance for Self-Directed Education website, which is self-directed.org, and I'll send the link to you, Kerry-Ann. You go there, you can pull up your state or your city if you're in the US, and you can look to see where are the self-directed education spaces and communities happening around you. You can look at homeschooling co-ops in your area. Some of them, like where we are now in Atlanta, many of them nurture and support various approaches to schooling. It's not just curriculum based. They can support you in getting to know your child and developing an emergent structure, is what we call it, instead of a predefined structure, an emergent structure that allows for a child like Ethan to get into the things he already knows he's into, get into it with community so he can look at things like, okay, if I love to move and I'm in a room with 7 other people and 3 of them actually are really uncomfortable with how I move around and I don't honor their space, Ethan is also going to get practice dealing with that with people who aren't saying, Ethan, lad, God, sit down, want you, or what's wrong with y'all for not letting him be. We're actually going to talk about the type of like equitable skills of people learning how to be themselves together, which doesn't mean that you just get for us out and bad and everybody else just, deal with who you are, right? These are things we deal with all the time with no practice.
Yeah, we never got that. And we talked about Ethan is the opposite of Sage, where Ethan is Mr. Showstopper. He's like on stage, look at me, dance, dance, dance.
That's
dance.
Marley, because she's a dancer too.
She's just like, he's just like in constant motion, like moving. Even in the hospital, right? And I didn't give you this joke. In the hospital, he was like doing sit-ups in his bed. And, he want all the child family people came in and they were like, but he also needs the community and the attention and people around. So like he's struggling right now with social distancing because none of the cousins can't come over. He FaceTimes them. And I mean, these cousins are high school kids, and so he's upset. No one has time for me. No one likes me. And it's like, understand, like for me, the alarm is like, baby, everybody won't have time on your time, and helping him
but where would he have practice with that? Because in school, everything is set up on a timer for you to, So with the example of a child like Ethan, and I love that we segued into this crisis schooling situation that's happening with the pandemic, because that's real. And I think it's a beautiful opportunity for more of us to start exploring unschooling, because a child
Akilah, cut you. Because when we say, we talk about this, everything is spiritual and divine, right? Because remember this path, because I have my own unschooling thing. And it's the only reason why I'm open to recognizing also from Ariel, my oldest, right? That, this is a path to explore. So I'll tell you my unschooling story later, but the whole, when the whole homeschooling thing happened, I said, look upon this, with exploring unschooling, we have the conversation in Florida, come now, the pit in them office, stay home.
Listen,
it's an easier, I don't want to say easier, but it created the environment for you to really explore.
Yes, it's an urgency is what it is.
Yes, it created an urgency to say, here's this opportunity to really now explore this thing that you've been considering for Ethan, and now Lika Harrison, they come behind, because of just how them do things. And so I think the like you said, because it's crisis schooling, because me not homeschooling and get one packet. We have to go through the packet and we send it to the teachers. The teachers are really nice, one nice Caribbean teacher. And she go and she's like, okay, Ethan. And she listened to Ethan and she give feedback. And what do you think? And she's because she knows that Ethan is emotional. She know all of the things about his personality. So in one sense, she has some more time to give him attention as opposed to when they were in class. And
imagine if that time wasn't based on trying to acclimate him to something that he didn't even have a choice in. Imagine that, right? So when we think about this crisis schooling, because you're so right, Kerry-Ann, like when you and I were talking at Podfest Expo a few months ago, we didn't even know. Right. But like spiritually, that was already being set up. And I love that. Beautiful. And that's important to name, because that's another part of unschooling. You do not do this like westernized, man-made colonizer thing to think that you have all the answers. No one has all the answers. Your child is their own spiritual whole being. They came with their own ecology. Unschooling says, I am who I am. My child is who they are. Instead of me thinking of them as a blank slate for me to like figure out or for make sure so them, become a good doctor or make me proud or whatever. What knowledge of self can I make sure that they have access to so they know how they learn? So going back to the example of Ethan being frustrated right now and feeling like nobody has time for him. If he was in an environment where lots of different people were meeting with him, he wasn't just around his peers in school. He has high school cousins who he relates to completely because maybe them love dance too, or they're extroverted as well, or they game together, all of these things. So unschooling, in an unschooling setting, you're not just with people who are your age, because guess what? Where else in life do you do that? Outside of your classroom, there's no other organic setting where you're only with the people who are your age and who live around your neighborhood, which is what schooling is. Ethan would have had practice and community, because I see it with my girls now, and they're 16 and 14, and Marley is super extroverted. He would have had communities already set up where they have their schedule for their gaming together, where they are used to things like some families travel, so they're not going to be able to do these things consistently. They would have what we call language and practice for self-directedness. So because Ethan is not self-directed, because someone is, like many kids, telling him what to do, when to go pee, raise your hand, blah, 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 blah. Now it's like, what? The whole thing is distorted the same way a lot of us feel when we graduate, right? Like, what? There isn't somebody who's going to make me wait. I'm not paying for, okay, relationship wise, now I'm in drama because I don't know how to deal with all these different aspects of, personal leadership, essentially. Because right now what we're dealing with, it's not a crisis in education. It's a crisis in relationship management. We don't know how to operate together outside of somebody telling us what to do and when. That is the crisis right now. And self-directed education gives you practice for that sort of thing. So when there is something like a pandemic or any other disruption, what we would have had and what a lot of unschoolers have right now, real talk, is a lot of language and practice for the necessary pivot. We know that our kid don't need a packet from a teacher, as nice as they might be, to learn, because we know that learning is something that happens in ways that some of it we recognize and some of it we don't. So an unschooling community is important, which can be virtual, which can be in person. Like I mentioned, the Agile Learning Centers, the co-ops, a lot of co-ops that I'm connected with here in Atlanta are now doing virtual meetups, some for the teens, some for tweens. There's just a lot of different things that are happening. It's hard on everybody because there's nothing like in person, but what tools do we have for these inevitable times when it's not going to be business as usual? This is showing us what a lack we have of personal leadership and community skills right now.
Yeah. So, may I go back a little bit? This is an unusual interview because we're not usual people, but I want to make sure that, while we get back and forth to unschooling, your story per se, because the connection, Lord, me have to give up my house, my car, my clothes, them, and we're going to do what? The idea of traveling and, travel more, everything nice and airy, but what? Me go keep living at people yard. Me not have no place to call my own. Like, talk to me a little bit about that, because
Totally.
Kiara house.
Yes, that's the standard. And, we started there, like Chris and I, as I mentioned, we definitely did the whole like American dream thing. Like your parents bring you come afar and say you can't, basically like do better than they did.
Yes. Akilah, wait, I know this come America to come. And then, yes. So talk to me about that.
So let me tell you. So for us, minimalism, right? Like we are also, I speak for myself, not all of us, but for me, I'm a minimalist, which is somebody who believes in things don't bring me value, experiences bring me value. So I'm not a minimalist that's like, oh, I only have 50 items or whatever. I don't count my stuff. I'm what is considered like a cozy minimalist. I'm going to have what feels good and I'm going to not have what I don't need. So a part of our deschooling process, which is a term that we use when you are no longer focused on school, when your life isn't school centered, there's a lot of, you like meditation, like a knowledge of self. You start to recognize like how Kerry-Ann realized like she was a part of someone else's school wounds, or the people that I meet all the time who start out like, nope, education is the key. And by the time I talk to them for 15 minutes, they say, wait there. Yes, I'm a professor. A lot of my clients are professors, like current college professors, who realize, like, for example, they always say that they hate doing this thing or that they're not strong in this area, when it's not actually true. It's just as a result of a pain point that they experienced during schooling that created a neurological pathway that said, oh, I identify as this, but actually that's not true. So for me, a lot of Caribbean people that I come across, as I was saying before, they've already experienced a school wound, or they've already experienced like the disillusionment of thinking that when you have a good house and a nice car and whatever, and Chris and I did that's what brings you joy. Because for Chris and I, we accomplished a lot of the things that our parents wanted us to and that we bought into as well. But personally, emotionally, first of all, we probably still wouldn't be married if we were, both in corporate, because we're also full-time entrepreneurs now. If we were both in corporate and the girls were, because we're tired, we're frustrated. By the time we get home, who has the patience? I gave all my patience to the white man who signed my check. So by the time I get home, don't come to me with no foolishness, because I'm going to lose my stuff, because this is the only place where I feel like I have power. For a lot of people who grew up in formerly colonized nations like we did, the idea of power, like home is where you have the power. And so you use it in a way that isn't even beneficial at home. And you don't have a place to work through those power structures. So it comes out on the people that you love the most. And most people understand that. Even if we don't know how to like resolve it, we can recognize it. So I want to make clear that, like, even though, yes, many, many Caribbean people are like stuck in the mindset of like education is how, we are also people of African lineage. We feel through things. There's some things that we might not be able to name, but we know it and we can honor that too. So, but I come go on like, okay, we like we can't, get the duality of those things like we do. So many people I come across say, boy, Akilah, I don't know what this would look like in structural form. I need some help on that. But like emotionally, spiritually, I see that I wasn't happy. I see that I survived school and school gave me benefits, but I also know that I could go into school. For example, a kid like Ethan could decide on college later on. You don't have to like push him down the path now, because he can explore all these different areas of interest, moving his body while doing it instead of stuck in a classroom, and then develop quite organically with your support, his father's support, and cousin them support, develop a path for himself that may include college, or it may not. It might include apprenticeships or starting a business. You see, so it's like this broad idea of like, how can I self-actualize without a focus on somebody else's idea? And for me, a lot of Caribbean people that I come across, it's not a matter of like, how do you even get there? It's like, what does that process look like? Because we can feel through, we feel that what's working is absolutely a result of something that we did not have any input in, something that we figured out how to conform to, not necessarily the way that we thrive, just how we survive.
Yeah, yeah. So, I know how my own personal experience has made me open to this concept of agile learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
But before that, like, what would you say to the person listening? Because I know a lot of people who are like, as Black people, education is the key. And
Yeah.
without education, we won't advance. And without education, we'll get repressed, oppressed, and all the things that if we don't get education from or a degree from a particular school. And I just want to clarify, are your kids going to get a college degree based on unschooling? Like,
Yeah.
like, do they still get like a diploma for them graduate from kind of school?
Yeah.
Like, what does that
Good
look like?
questions. Yes, great question. So they can, because each state, and we're only talking about the US right now because that's the schooling system that I'm most familiar with, right? So everybody would have to do that research, like for people listening outside of the US. Um, but each state has its different ways that you get a diploma or a GED. So, for example, in the state of Georgia, you can just get a GED. You don't have to go through high school to get the Kingdom or whatever. Any unschooler can do that. In most of the states, there is a process for getting the equivalent of a high school diploma without going from, 9th through 12th grade. So that's the first thing. Almost every US state that I'm aware of, you can do that. So you just apply through the state. You don't need it from like a school or a place like that. Secondly, as far as continuing education, like college, grad school, all of that, many unschoolers, not only do many unschoolers move on to college and postgraduate studies, there are now in lots of universities, I just sat in a class in the University of Maryland last week, that unschooling is a course of study. Why? Because they're recognizing the deficiencies in conventional education, because people leave school with 10,000 degree. However, they don't have good analytical skills. They don't have good people skills. Their level of privilege overshadows their capacity to be in community where people can trust them. So they don't make the sales, all of these things that translate in corporate culture. So now they are really doing a lot of research around self-directed spaces and students to try to like nurture those skills. So yes, you can go to college, because in the US, there's a thing called a Common App. There's actually an article that I'll send you, Kerry-Ann, from an unschooler who owns a space in Austin, Texas, who talks specifically about what the process looks like and the advantages that self-directed students have over conventionally educated students, because our portfolios are freaking amazing. Because my daughters have interned at this place and done this thing, an apprentice here, instead of getting an A in a class where the teacher was under duress. You understand? So yes, you can do all of those things. The difference is that typically, not always, because I don't want to romanticize it, but typically an unschooler goes into continuing education with a knowledge of self, with the actual practiced skills, because they've worked with a small business, whether them auntie, them uncle, their neighbor, doing the actual thing that they're interested in. And they already have established some level of like practical relationship with the thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of what you're saying is also what I know, because it's my experience, is our emotional attachment to the title. So like, yeah, we know GEDs are available in every state, right? But it's
Yeah.
your idea of that the GED is less than you did dunce and drop out of
Yeah.
school. That's why you have the GED. So a
Yeah.
lot of it is emotional. And even for me, I think I told you, but I didn't finish college.
Yeah, you did tell me.
Yeah,
Yep.
up until the point, me a bright girl, me not 17 yet in a college, me get scholarship and
Yep.
and then me go breed, Lord Jesus, so me
Yep.
bring down fire and brimstone for everybody. And I mean, I went, I took a semester off and then I went back to school and then I was in Wisconsin and then I moved to New York and I would get emotional because the office I worked at the time was on Broadway and Bleecker. So, NYU right down the road.
Yes.
So when graduation time come, my feelings, me feel
Yes.
workless, less than, all of these things about emotions, right?
Yep.
Around school and that I didn't do what I was supposed to do, finish
Right.
college, right?
Yes. When
And
all
so
that means is that your life took a different path, and look at the person that you are now.
let me tell you, completely different path, because I made the decision, and my mother for a long time, she don't say no, for a long time, she said, me never tell you if you move out, because in her head, my decision was, my mom at the time, she has 4 kids, now a grandpitney, make 5, right?
Yes.
And I was like, I love Wisconsin, but me can't really support myself and move bing bang back and forth.
Yes.
Me a Brooklyn girl. So I moved back to New York to support myself and my child.
Yep.
And I felt like New York created that environment for me to do it. And so I found a job. And there were so many things I learned on the job. And because I had to supplement learning. So learning never stopped. I just had to find other ways to learn and gain skills and upskill. So while my friends were in college, I meet them come to proofread them paper. I proofread paper, mark up. I learned computer skills in 1999, advanced Excel, Word, PowerPoint when everybody else in college. So I kind of took that skill of learning differently in order to get ahead.
Exactly. And that is a life skill that I know you apply still to this day,
Yes.
Not only in terms of the logistics of the skill, but emotionally. Again, we try to separate, and schoolishness tells us to separate emotion, but we are full of emotion. When you said about graduation, you didn't even talk about like getting the thing. You talked about the feeling of like now a lot of kids are not going to get to walk across the stage. Those feelings matter. So we have to really challenge ourselves to step outside of the norm, the old norm of why we do what we do, because the emotions matter. So now emotionally, you have a level of personal leadership strength and fortitude that a lot of people live undead and don't experience, because we spend, so many of us, our entire lives just going from one master to another, somebody that's like dictating everything for you. So some people might hear your story and say, but boy, then she will like find the clients, and then if our friend appear and blah, blah, blah. But think about it. If that level of rigor was inside academia and you were paying for it, nobody would have a problem with it. They'd be like, Kerry-Ann, that's it. That's life. That's grit. Those are the skills you need. But you have a level of fortitude now that is like, I'm sure super strong, because you can always go back to, look, you can't tell me anything, because I know when I did these things, when you were sitting in your classroom or partying on the weekends and waiting for the teacher to give the next assignment, here's what I was doing. And that skill translates across all kinds of mediums, logistically, strategically, and emotionally. And that's all.
Yeah, me did have to work hard because, because I didn't have a degree, we work in the legal industry, so everyone at the law firm, they want, big degree. And I had to
share that background too. Yep.
Yeah, I had to work my butt off, to get, learn different things. If this certification over here, it's like apprenticeship. You over years, you'll learn this skill and they certify, say, yeah, man, should go through this program and should learn it. I had to find unconventional ways to learn, and it wasn't easy, but it's like you said, it built the resilience to say, all right, there's gonna be a no over here, so me go, all right, watch the ride, we're gonna move over here. So and then
relationships, not just the resilience, but also real relationships.
Yes. And so from that experience allowed me to recognize and was fortunate to have teachers who, when my oldest Ariel, this Jamaican teacher was teaching her in this private school, and she said, listen, Ariel's a good student, but like when she in a class, she do good, but upon the test them, she not do so good. So this is what you need. Like, this is what she needs. And this concept, even the IEP, individualized education plan, it is like, because it's part of the special ed department, or it's in the New York City public school, it gets a very bad name. But in the reality, it is not really self-directed, but it's a plan around how she learns.
Yeah.
It is like,
it's a start. Yes.
And when, I mean, the transformation was ridiculous. She had an emotional issue because of the stigma of what having an IEP meant, but she was a better student because she had the IEP.
Yes.
It accommodated that, she needed more time, instead of looking at all of the smarter students who didn't
need that. And what does that
time.
tell you about the IEPs? Like, every student actually needs one.
No, that's what I realized.
Right.
That's what I realized.
The system is the problem, because those of us, and you and I might be among them, I definitely identify as one. The fact that I thrived by the standards of the school system does not mean that I thrived as a person through the school system. It means that I figured out how to perform for the system, which had its benefits, but it also came with significant emotional and social damage that I constantly am working through. And I'm 42 years old today. Okay. So that's—
You said today?
Well, as of today, not as of today, but
I was
right
about to say happy birthday. Okay.
Right now, I'm 42. Yes. And so these are the reasons why we get it. Like, we get it innately, because so many of us know what it's like to have the checklist things, the house, the car, your parents proud of you, all of that. But the person in the mirror, right? The person in your mindscape, the voice in your mind, the one when you're around other people and you're having all the doubts about who you are and who's judging you and blah, blah, blah. Those skills and that talk, those things are also developed in your learning environment. And so the whole idea that a school system is going to create an IEP, when most of us have to unlearn, have to de-school, which is another way of saying decolonize our minds from somebody else's ways of approving of us. Like we talked about at the beginning, when Marley was like, why doesn't she know how to read, with this level of condescension? I was like, listen, like I had to like.
But that's kind of what Ethan did the other day. So there was a Zoom call with the thing, and I'm gonna talk to the little pitney like, in a way that's rude. Me immediately, me and my husband say, "Oh yeah, talk to," like, like.
Yes, and that's what happened with me and Chris, and we realized, wait a minute. Of course, she's gonna feel like that, because the teacher that my eye power up, we eye power up. Like, we're telling her the same thing that I was taught, because I was labeled gifted. So is Chris. When we came to the U.S., like, you are better. You are better. The same social skills. I give this example all the time. Kerry-Ann, if you're working, you have a podcast network, and I'm developing a podcast network. Me and you get together, I would talk, and then you tell me about Glenn from Horse Radio Network and this and that. What is that? That's good, right? That's us being in community and sharing. In a classroom, that's punishable. You cheated. You gave let's like really, really, really take a stop, right, on what conventional, because I don't call it traditional, because traditional is sharing. Traditional is intergenerational. So never call it traditional schooling. Conventional schooling is an undoing of a lot of the human-centric ways that we learn and produce and have knowledge of self and each other. Let's really pay attention to that reality, because the stuff we're connected to, especially as people who migrate to the US and all of that, is about like having to be safe, like being able to thrive, these academic things. Don't get it twisted. Those things, you can still get those things without confining a child to a bunch of years of somebody else's idea of what they should learn. And you can do that in communities like Agile Learning networks, because there's a bunch of them, like starting or becoming part of a cooperative that allows for the parents who do not work out of the home and have the space to organize the trips. And all of these things are possible and happening. My podcast is a space where you can hear how lots of families went from being imprisoned by school to creating something that made sense for their community and their family. You can do that. And I want to make sure that we, encourage people to think about that. Your kid does not have to be stuck in a contortionist version of their life. They can actually be free to be themselves and learn and get supported and go to college if they want to and need to, and develop a bunch of super relevant life skills in the meantime.
Yeah, I love it. I know say anybody listening to this then go have some follow-up question, because I can't ask you all the questions. I'm so glad that we had this conversation in this space. So now crisis, you call it the homeschooling that are going during, pandemic is crisis learning.
Crisis schooling, yeah.
Crisis schooling, I should say.
Yeah.
So like what can you tell like parents? I mean, me have Ethan, the 2-year-old, the oldest one is in college, so she has Zoom call. Like, or other people have smaller kids. Like, what can you tell them to help them? Because I think a lot of it, for me, I know, is grace and patience.
Yes,
and
yes.
A lot of times neither exists.
Yes. Listen, real talk. Yes.
It's like, no, I'm not the patience today, little boy. Like, just do the work. And, I'm on the pan game from morning till night.
Yep.
And,
what would I say to those parents? Yeah.
Yes.
I've been having a lot of like webinars. So come over to raisingfreepeople.com, first of all. That's my main page. And I'm going to be there. You can find a lot of the resources for the things that I get into, because it's not just my work. I'm also constantly in collaboration with other people who support making self-directed education accessible for families who want it, because people think of it like a rich white people thing. And that's one of the decolonization things that I personally make sure that I'm part of, demystifying that foolishness. This is not just for like people with money or white people. Liberation is for everybody. And the practice of that is what we do. So the first thing that I would say is recognize right now, right? Like, the things that got us here in the first place are not going to move us out of it. If you take the approach of how can I, as much as possible, hold on to this old normal, make sure they finish the packet and make sure they're having a good balance of gaming versus blah, blah. That's your first problem. Stop it. We need a complete paradigm shift. What if, ask yourself a question like, what if my child was spending hours gaming because a part of it is how they navigate the stress of the uncertainty of the pandemic. And maybe even though they're not telling me, they're really worried about it, just like I'm not telling them and I'm really worried about it. But I have wine and I have Netflix, and what they have is that. Is that bad? Like, what if I just watch them do that for a whole week? What if I just, a lot of that what if I just is what I would say calls for right now, because we're in a unique space. You guys, we have an opportunity to like reimagine what education and learning can look like, because we've conflated the two. Education is like something what people do to you. Like, learning is like a process that is something you inhabit, you take it in, you believe in it, you own it. And we're talking about shifting from education to learning. So your job right now as a parent is to observe as much as you can, to take notes about your own feelings. Like how Kerry-Ann just said, I realize that a lot of it is about grace and I oftentimes don't have it. Can you busy yourself with tracking like the time of day where you tend to be the least graceful? What is that tied to? Could that be the time of day where you lock yourself in the bathroom and take like 22 deep breaths, or go for a walk outside with nobody else? Like, shift the mindset from holding on to the old thing over to what the new thing is showing you is possible. That's what I would say.
Yeah. I think you already know that we're supposed to have the conversation, because I know, because Ethan, when I second grade, first grade, kindergarten was fine, because kindergarten is more about exploring and figuring things out. By time first grade come, they must say, all right, you have to buckle down now. And the buckle down never worked too well. And in my dance and him need to show out. And second grade again, the more buckling down is, So I already know that me want to nip this before, the fire or the light that is Ethan, and we know his Ethan gets dimmed
Yes,
because
please.
because he's this thing, and of course we have the other things he'd had to deal with in the time being hospitalized. But it's just knowing that, and I say this, and I still kind of struggle with it because, you don't go from being in a Caribbean, very structured and rigid British Caribbean school system to go back and be laissez-faire about it. But it's also that school wounds episode, which I'll put in the show notes, made me realize how that was driving how I was projecting my life and my experiences on the kids and putting that pressure
I'm
around.
so familiar with that. Yes.
It's like and I mean, it's very hard. So even though I'm saying it and anyone's listening, you might recognize it, but you can't. It's like they were saying in Jamaica, you can't bend the tree when it all. You understand?
Yes, exactly. That's so funny that you bring that up, because we talk about that as one of the things to get away from, like, bend the tree while it's young. Like, that's what we do to our children, thinking we're doing it for our children. And it's so hard to switch out because that's what we know. But when it take a stop, I have this class called Parenting Patois. We talk about, like, we just use like certain patois phrases to tie in parenting. And one of them is, when we take a stop, right? Because there's so many things where all you need is a disruption for you to check in and realize, wait a minute, just as you just said, Kerry-Ann, I am projecting. It turns out that what I'm calling my approach to parenting is very much informed by my own, the projections of my own things that I haven't resolved yet. What if I took some time, instead of making that my kid's problem, what if I actually manage that myself? How much room then would my kid have to show up as themselves, trusting me to show up as themselves, and me being able to receive that self, not from a space of, but how does this tie into what I understand, but more so, how can we understand? That's why we call it partnership. Not partnership as in we're equal. My children will tell you, Mom says all the time, we're not equal. However, and I have no problem with that. Like, it's not unparenting. Don't get it twisted. Like, we're not equal, but things can be equitable, especially when it comes to their learning, because it's their life.
Yeah, a lot of it, from my experience, it's about perception of what people will think of me.
Boom.
or what I, so I'll tell you another story. All of these stories are around Ethan, because Ethan is the child that marks a very drastic, he's reaping the benefits of the things I learned later with the older child who is 22. And so the 22-year-old is looking at this 7, almost 8-year-old and telling our uncles that this 8-year-old I get her with murder. Like, she's like, what is going on? This is not the same mommy, right? And so, like, the other day, I think I was telling a joke, like, he thought he was born in Jamaica, because in a theme head, everything is Jamaican. So why wasn't he born in Jamaica? For a quick second, I felt embarrassed, because I'm like, how to pick the born America? I don't know which part in born, because by the minute we can walk around in Jamaica, your date of birth, everything, so, like, at certain ages, you're supposed to know the basics. Where he was born is a basic. And at 7, how him for tell me say born in Jamaica, right?
Right.
But then I also understood that there were moments where, he was watching something on TV, and the people in mine, like, on TV said, oh, I like tamarind fruit. And he's like, Mommy, I want to try tamarind fruit. Mr. Little boy, sitting them what daddy buy over there. So with the whole heap of sugar, same thing. And he's like, really? He's like, really? But what I do is they're exposed to the culture, but the connections are made when they're watching their little video game, and then they realize that.
Integrating it.
Yes. And so part of me felt guilty that he did not know that tamarind fruit is the tamarind ball. Like, I felt a way about it.
Yes.
Like, me, I met them people up on YouTube. So somebody go tell me, say, oh, you're picking up too much screen time on YouTube. Like, but I also recognize that it was, he's absorbing it every day. Someone else just made it real, or, like you said, integrate. The same thing. She grew up in the house. She hear the song them. She know the berries them. Now she older, she probably sing it. But she didn't really care about Caribbean culture until Drake stopped link with
Thank you.
popcorn.
And
Then
if you tried to make her, you would actually push her away from it because you're like, no, but you need to hear this Barry song. No, you
yes,
need to listen to this D Brown, blah, blah, blah. Look at that. If you would have coerced it, right? Whereas now
yes.
Drake brought it in for you. You didn't even have to do it.
I didn't have
Drake.
to. So
Right.
those are very clear examples. And I remember on this
Yes.
podcast, and I was even thinking through it. I'm like, yeah, but Jamaican, how you not teach the youth about Marcus, Paul Bogle,
We go through
George
that
William,
too.
God,
Yes.
all of the people.
However, how many things can they tell us that we aren't aware of a variety of different things? Like that history and culture is important to us. And because they are around us, it doesn't have to be in childhood, right? Because we're trying to develop actual relationships with our children here. The things that are influential to my mother are influential to me. A lot of them now, far more so than when I used to call all of mommy's music a checker because one of them sound like a checker. Now,
yes.
now I mean that, right? Like that's like, mommy, can you send me your playlist from this, that, and like
listen, but that's the same feeling I got when my daughter is into retro stuff. So she like, me no know, she go out and buy one turntable. We, you know, like, me say, what is this? And she come in with the third world album.
Yes.
And there's a point of joy that reached into my soul because she know me love third world, right? So it's like,
yes.
part of that is not necessarily forcing certain things, and it's not easy. I'm not perfect. My pitney will say,
no
Mommy,
one is. Yes, no one is. Yeah.
She's recognizing, and I think with Ethan, the struggle is letting Ethan be Ethan, but also as a boy, struggling with not letting him be labeled a particular way because he didn't fit into the schooling. And those are very real concerns about what he fits into and what he's able to do. And as a Black boy going
and
into
how he feels about himself and his also his knowledge of that reality, right? Because that's one of the things we cannot afford to, as Black people, particularly, you know, as Caribbean people, to shelter our kids from the realities of, I see you as this way, but, you know, here outside, this is how you are viewed, which is why unschooling for me is liberation work, because it says, instead of it saying, here's the way that society views you, you know, white supremacy is real, it's a systemic thing, it's not about having white friends, it's a systemic thing. So you have to go to college, and you have to do this, and you have to blah, blah first, and then in your 40s, then after you've accomplished all the things, you could be yourself. No, unschooling says, let's not make it just about contortionism, about fitting in to assimilate. Let's make it about thrive. So my kid has these real life experiences. They know how to manage these skills because we practice it. We're not just putting academics first and then say, well, the rest of the stuff God and your parents will figure out. No, we're putting it all together and saying a child like Ethan needs to understand aspects of boundaries. He needs to understand that as a little Black boy, by the time he hits 9 or 10, maybe even now, other people white people in particular, are going to look at him as a grown-up and treat him accordingly. So whatever these are skills that nobody's even really talking about our children to, especially in schools. We'll buck them up, you know, and we'll buck them up in a very scary, scary way. This is why I believe in self-directed education, because it says, who am I? What is my position in society? How do I feel about that? What are the ways that I feel oppressed or I am oppressing other people with ways that I am? And what can I do with my learning and my living experiences to really be with that? You know, how do I serve with my skill sets? How do I meet other people whose skill sets strengthen the ones of mine that are not strong, instead of beating myself up because when I like maths? So what? I can just work with somebody who's great at it, and I can work on editing because I freaking love it. These are the things that can happen when we say, wait a minute, what does it mean for me to be there for my son as he is, as opposed to trying to fit him into a system that will never, ever get him and he could never be comfortable in?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. All right. So if we're not stop somewhere, we go on forever. So Akilah, why don't you tell everybody where to find you? Social media, our website, whichever one you want to do. And, all the resources that Akilah mentioned, I'll put those in the show notes. But,
Yeah.
this is not for everybody, but if you feel like it resonate with you, like it's been resonating with me, because I know my child.
Yeah.
And, I really think it's something to explore. So Akilah, tell them where they could connect with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So raisingfreepeople.com is my primary website. Everything is there. I'm on Instagram at Fare of the Free Child. It's FARE, like the cost. My podcast is about Black, non-Black, Indigenous, and people of color who practice unschooling and other forms of self-directed education. That podcast is called, once again, Fare of the Free Child, and you can listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. The Alliance for Self-Directed Education, I am an organizer with that space, self-directed.org. Brilliant place for you to just get your research on for what should I talk about? How you do that there? How does this? That's a great site for that in addition to mine. I also lastly have a book coming out in August called Raising Free People, Unschooling as Healing and Liberation Work.
Awesome. All right. Thanks everybody for listening. And like I love to say at the end of the show, walk good. You've been listening to Carry On Friends, a show about the Caribbean American experience. We post new episodes every 2 weeks. And if you want to learn more, buy merchandise, or sign up for our newsletter, check out our website, carryonfriends.com. The Carry On Friends podcast is produced by Breadfruit Media, and new episodes are available every other Tuesday morning. You can listen to the podcast on the website, carryonfriends.com, or you can listen on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you like to listen to your podcast.